We now want to turn to Jerusalem to Professor Eugene Kantorovich. He's the Director of International Law Department at the Kohelet Policy Forum. I do want to ask you about Netanyahu. They're speaking to foreign ambassadors, and there is more and more pressure globally on Israel to end the fighting in Gaza and to come to a ceasefire with Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. There is an offer on the table, so we hear, from Egypt for a ceasefire starting tomorrow at 6 a.m. Hamas claims that it agreed to it, Israel not so far. In terms of the legality and some of the legal issues that Israel faces, what are some of the challenges at this point towards a ceasefire?
The challenge is that Hamas knows that it can launch attacks on Israeli cities and Israeli civilians while having an insurance policy against being defeated, namely the international pressure for a ceasefire. And what this pressure amounts to is, under the United Nations Charter, every country has an inherent right of self-defense. And America's Western allies, like the United States, like France, they recognize that. But unlike any other country in the world, Israel's inherent right of self-defense comes with a stopwatch, right? You can defend yourselves for 5 minutes. You can defend yourselves for a week. What other country has a right to defend itself but has to stop after a week? When the United States was attacked on 9/11, did anyone say you can take out the Taliban in Afghanistan, but wait, hold on, you're on the clock, right? Whatever you can't take care of after a week or 10 days, you can't take care of ever.
The difference, if I'm not mistaken, Professor Kantorovich, the difference, if I'm not mistaken, is between two sovereign countries fighting, or the United States, for example, launching an attack in Afghanistan, and here a situation in which Israel in some way is responsible over the West Bank and Gaza. These are not sovereign territories.
Whether it's sovereign or not makes absolutely no difference. Hamas, first of all, most of the world recognizes a state of Palestine. Hamas is not controlled, Gaza is not controlled in any way by Israel. And by the way, the war that the United States launched in Afghanistan was not a war against Afghanistan per se, but was a war against the Taliban, a non-state terrorist group that was being harbored by the Afghanistani government. I don't know why it makes any difference whether the right to self-defense is inherent. The UN Charter does not say a country has a right to self-defense against foreign countries. The right to self-defense even applies internally, right? A country can defend itself in a civil war from insurgents. The right to self-defense is absolute. And
I'm not sure I'm clear. I'm clear on what you see as Israeli responsibility over the Gaza territory, because Gaza is blockaded by Israel for many years now, since Hamas took over. The border is opened for sometimes for, of course, some humanitarian relief to come in, for some goods, for food, etc. But Israel controls the border, right? So how can you say that Israel does not? Israel does not run Gaza on a civil perspective, but it does control the borders of Gaza.
With Gaza. Mm-hmm. That's not the same as control. So blockade, closing borders and limiting supplies, is what you do when you're in a state of hostilities with a country. So, for example, when Armenia was at war with Azerbaijan and its allies blockaded Armenia. Nobody said that Azerbaijan controlled Armenia. Blockade is a normal tool of war. It was used against Libya in 2011. That does not mean you control. Right? There's no reason. One's not required to open one's border to an enemy regime. Jordan, for example, Lebanon, does not open its border to Israel. Does that mean it controls Israel? They're enemy states. Enemy entities don't open their border. That does not mean Israel controls Gaza. And by the way, when did Israel close the border? After Hamas took over and launched a terror campaign. So this is a measure itself of self-defense. And I think your question highlights that whenever Israel engages in self-defense, it's blamed essentially for the harm that it imposes on the Palestinians. Now, Egypt has also closed its border to Gaza, by the way. Gaza does not only have one border, and that they did not do because they were being attacked from Gaza, but rather simply because they didn't want to have an open border. Okay. So maybe the criticism is better laid there.
point is made clear. Thank you very much, Professor Eugene Kantorovich, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I now